Welcome to the Find Your Voice, Change Your Life podcast with psychologist Dr. Doreen Downing. Listen in as Doreen interviews people who felt they didn't have a voice or who suffered extreme speaking anxiety. You'll hear stories about how they struggled to speak up, what they did to find their authentic voice, and the confidence they now feel to speak up and make an impact. If you want to get started right away to find your voice, download Doreen's free 7-step guide to fearless speaking at doreen7steps.com. And now, here is Doreen.
Hi, this is Dr. Doreen Downing. I am so excited today to introduce you to a new friend of mine. I've met Calvin Niles on the Mindfulness Professionals Network, and I have listened to his podcast, I've read his books, and I've already beginning to open my heart. And as soon as I saw him on the camera today with a full, brilliant smile, I just wanted to spend the whole session just smiling at each. Hi, Calvin.
Hello, Dr. Doreen. It's delighted to be here, and thank you for your kind words. I feel the same. I want to smile at you all day as well.
Well, there's a resonance, there's a connection, there's something that we share about life and how people can become more of who they're meant to be. That feels like what we're both here for.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
You have a brief bio. I'd like to read it so that people get a little bit of history, but we'll also let them know at the end how to contact you because you do offer amazing services. Calvin Niles is known as the Mindful Storyteller and is an award-winning coach and consultant. He is the best-selling author of The Sun Rises in Eastmoor and co-host of Mindful Conversations podcast. And you can find him at, well, www, as we say, calvinniles.com. And that's Niles, right? calvinniles.com. There was something else before we launched today that I found in reading on your website that I'd like to read out loud because it really touched me. And you said, my mission is to enable impactful ways to relate and communicate with ourselves and with each other and unlock authentic engagement through self-discovery and expression. And that, I feel, is what this podcast is all about anyway, is people coming on and sharing their life story and being an inspiration, but also we get to engage. We have a conversation. And that's what I think captivates people, is the fact that you aren't just out there promoting yourself. It's like, well, so what does it mean to be you? And how did you get to be somebody who's a coach and an award-winning author? But you didn't start that way. So let's go back and give us a little bit of history, childhood, where you grew up, and any kind of struggle that you feel stands out when you look back.
Thank you for the warm introduction and for asking. Yes, so I was raised in the Caribbean. I was raised in a tiny, beautiful island called Barbados. And that place is where I spent, I would say, my first 15 or 16 years of my life. My mother is from another island, a neighboring island, but my father traveled a lot with his job. So he spent a lot of time not actually physically there. And I'd visit him as a child. And we traveled with him as a family as well, with his work. My mother was from Trinidad. Well, she is in Trinidad and is from Trinidad. And she's the nurturing nurse, public health servant, spiritual warrior. My father was the government worker, disciplinarian, the man who brings home the bacon. And basically, I was raised in a very loving environment. I was very fortunate to have that. And I did have a very strict dad too. So he kept us all, me and my siblings, on our P's and Q's. And And actually, sometimes he was very strict. Sometimes that would, also, I guess, cause us to be scared. If I'm speaking plainly, to be scared of the consequences of whatever action or activity we might or might not take.
That makes sense. I heard a lot of stories about well-meaning parents, and they have their own histories and they have their own approach to raising children, and there's often the right way. I've interviewed some people who have been children of military parents, so
Mhm.
I've heard that before about that kind of how that affects us as children is, okay, there's a right way and a wrong way. I better straighten up my back and, like you said, P's and Q's and A's and B's and C's and all the letters. Let's make sure we get them right. So, but it's approval when they say yeah to us, don't you? It feels like the positive side is we get the approval, and that feels like love.
Yeah. Yeah, I can certainly identify with that. I mean, I think, you know, the school system was quite rigid when I
Mm.
was small. Um, and, we were kind of raised in such a way that, good boy, this is good behavior. And then bad boy, this is bad behavior. And often the bad behavior would be corrected with physically being slapped or beaten with a belt or a stick or whatever. And that was quite normal growing up in the Caribbean in those days. Teachers would whip you and stuff like that. Now, I never told my father that because for some reason it was just something you never came home and told your parents that you got beaten at school because it was so normal. It's actually so normal. But of course, then, you want to impress your parents. And I certainly wanted to impress my parents. And I think that generation of raising children probably helped to, reinforce this kind of carrot and stick mentality in how you you bring your kids up, right? This is good. So, I'll give you a practical example, right? My dad was the kind of dad who would like call family meetings in the evenings and ask us all to explain why our grades are the way they are. And everybody would, these four of us as kids, and we'd all have to take turns one by one. Why did you only get 78%? Why not 88? Why not 98?
Mhm.
Why was the report from last year? And these kind of really long pauses to make you quake in your boots while you're while you're waiting for him to say his next word. So he was quite strict like that.
Mhm.
But can I just say it was a really strange thing too, because he had this potential to be so loving
Yeah.
and so gentle. And the irony too is my dad never hit me once.
Mhm. That's
But yeah.
but what you're just saying, though, is also a presence, and words are very powerful, and sometimes the physical is not necessary to, actually implant in somebody, "I better be careful," or else.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And it took some time, and I don't want to sort of race ahead. But those early years were like that. I mean, it took me some time to, I guess, come full circle and realize that actually my dad did the best he could do.
Mhm.
And also, I don't want to do a kind of don't want to do an injustice here by missing out all the amazing things he did too, and an amazing way he was, because he was more loving than not, but he was just a very strict disciplinarian, and that kind of trains you to be looking for that approval.
Yes, and the way those who are just listening that haven't watched you, when you mimicked what that looked like, it was pretty scary, Calvin. You took on a face that might just put other people in their boots who are listening. So I would like to just, before we go too much further forward, is you mentioned school and the harshness that the teachers gave their students. You must have like you said, there were a couple of times when you had been, what you might say, corrected. What were the kinds of outlandish behaviors early on in school that you remember?
You mean that that would cause some,
Yeah,
to the
yeah.
teachers to want to whip you or something?
You specifically, yes.
Me, yes. Everybody would. I mean, a lot of it was work related for us. I think one of the things is it's really strange. I mean, Barbados is a tiny island with 250,000 people. It's small. I mean, the name, it outweighs the population. The reputation outweighs the population quite significantly. So it was very high education standard from a literacy point of view and academic point of view. So from that point of view, I guess you could say, well, okay, the government had a strong intention, people did something right. But what I think actually they did wrong, or maybe a better word would be to say what I thought was probably more harmful, was things like being beaten for not knowing your times tables, or playing in the mornings and getting your school uniform sweaty. Remind you, this is a hot country, okay? It's
Uh-huh.
tropical. So you would get sweaty quite easily if you started to run around in the morning, things like that. And I remember as a kid, we'd go and play in the mornings, or at least if we were brave enough to, or maybe forget the potential for punishment, we would go and run and climb trees, or play catch me if you can, or whatever it might be. And if you broke a sweat, you would see kids literally hoping to dry their shirts off before, like fanning their shirts on their body, hoping to dry their shirts off before they got to the class. Because if the teacher thought you came to school first thing in the morning and you're getting yourself sweaty, because your uniform needed to be pristine, right? It needed to shine.
There
It
you
needed
go again with
mm,
that standard, that perfection.
yeah. The seams needed to almost cut you when you touched them. Your socks needed to have the garters in them to hold them up. If your socks were too stretched out, they'd fall. And, when you're wearing shorts, if your socks fell and you looked untidy, so you'd get whipped on your legs. So it was all of this kind of stuff that used to happen in school that we considered to be normal,
Yes.
which I reflect and I realize it was actually abuse, if I'm honest. But that was how all of us were. I mean, I wasn't unique.
Right. Right. I'm glad you framed it like you just did around literally it was abuse, but it wasn't, you weren't framing it as a young kid that it was abusive. And only later looking back, you went, So the idea about voice and finding your voice when you're a young one, because that's where we first get that sense of self and the confidence, and then we move out into school and other social environments. My sense about you and finding your voice early on is there wasn't a lot of room for that. And I think comparison to who you are now and what you've worked on is expansion, that the whole idea of having been so contained as a younger there, as a young one, and having some boundaries and some limits. And so I'm feeling the juxtaposition of this early life and what you're still not that way. You're not that way. You did not live your life in a container, because the work you do now is so open, so open-hearted, so open-minded. Let's move forward a little bit on your journey. And what would you say happened next in the kind of discovery, self-discovery mode?
Yeah, thank you. I like the word or the expression you just used, juxtaposition of those things. Because if I would just add one tiny remark, is that while all of that was happening, and it literally was true, actually, the school system was abusive, there was still a degree of freedom there
Mm,
that I would say I was very fortunate to experience too, to be able to wander off from my parents' house for, what felt like miles anyway to a young child without having to be worried, or my parents having to be worried, because there was this sense of community
Mm.
that, there was always somebody who knew where you were, 30, 40, 50 houses down the road. Or, there was just a kind of different level of freedom. So the juxtaposition is a wonderful, wonderful word to use. It's paradox even sometimes.
Uh-huh.
But later I would say, so I finally finished my studies, and then I moved to London as a teenager. And that was where I would say I discovered a new version of freedom. Had I found my voice exactly? Well, I mean, I would say I made a big leap in the right direction. Certainly made a big leap in the right direction. I was able to go to a college and spread my wings in a way that I had never been able to do before. I was able to do writing and media studies and explore my creativity and do things in a way that actually there was a kind of rebirth for me there. It was a huge moment for me personally to start to actually discover things that wanted to emerge out of me without the pressure of anyone else or any
Yeah.
other thing saying that this is what you should be or should do.
Yeah. And defend yourself, or else
Mm,
no one standing over you with the stick, or the gaze, the hard
yeah,
eyes.
certainly no one externally.
Oh, you just pointed to something, didn't you?
I just find that, sometimes it's so easy to endogenize. We can take some of our external circumstances and bring them inside.
Yes.
And then we could have all the shoulds and have tos and must dos that we might have heard externally once upon a time, and carry that internally until we decide to let it go.
Yeah, but first
So
you have to become aware of it, and that feels like you, just by being in a new environment that without a lot of boundaries, the boundaries that you came up against were probably in your own head, but you started to grow there in London. Did you ever go back? Are you still in London? Is that
yeah, London
where you
is my home
landed?
now. Yeah,
Oh,
it's been my home for 20 something years, in
mhm.
my early 40s now. Um, and so it's been my home ever since. I still have my ties to, I mean, my birth home, Barbados, will always be home. They'll always be home.
Mhm.
I was born there. My dad's from there. My that region, the Caribbean, will always be home.
Mhm.
But London is also home because I've lived here for most of my life, actually.
Mhm. Mhm. Well, in terms of you stepping into a new environment that gave you way more opportunities to be more, well, discover more and be more at the same time. What else let's talk about a little bit more about you early on, as you're moving into the world, your voice, like what felt like truly you early on?
Yeah, it's, it's really fascinating. I think being able to express myself
Mhm.
became something very important without me realizing it. Um, for I don't know how many years I could remember, I never wanted to read a book. Um, I never wanted to, you know, do anything that would cause me to explore my creative potential. Um, but when I was really young, I was, and I think this is probably true for a lot of people who grew up in a safe place, um, just want to express yourself organically. And I think I rekindled that actually in the move, when you talked about the creative expression, when you talked about the space, I somehow was able to rediscover this burning, this urge, this kind of fire to create. So I think the voice started to find itself. I mean, recently, I actually found something I wrote 20 something years ago that I had forgotten that I had written. And I realized that it was one of the first things that I did where I wrote organically, kind of like a journal, since I'd been able to spread my wings.
Mhm.
And I think allowing that space for these things to arise helped me to find that voice, actually.
Mhm.
You know, I was always good at writing. When I was in university, I thrived and excelled in it. But all that's come from books, you know.
Mhm.
The books, or you read the book, you read an essay, you know, you kind of turn it all around in your head.
Mhm.
But there was something else I wanted to emerge. And then that started to kind of rise up. And it started to come out slowly and eventually started to expand. And I can't tell you exactly when that happened. But it started to happen, I would say, after that move.
Well, again, people who aren't watching, you just raised your hands up and it just felt like the skies were opening up for you and that you I think the point you just made is that finding your voice isn't like a, oh, there it is. I sat down and I found it. It it really, you're saying that discovering who you are, because voice comes from who you are, and that it was a gradual kind of movement into the more, I guess, and the potential that was not only waiting, but also had been, you're talking about it being remembered. Something about got reignited in your soul.
Yes, I like the way you express that. I mean, there's a part that feels true about it, without thinking about it. You know, there is a part that emerges and it just feels good. And there is no kind of requirement for anyone to pass judgment, actually, because you don't care. And I didn't care. I just enjoyed this process of discovery. Um, and then I feel as time progressed, I mean, you know, of course, more challenges came, you know, and if anybody's ever looked at my story, they would know that, you know, I went through some challenges with relationship breakdown and some really deep self-inquiry that came as a consequence of that. But and I would say that would probably be another phase of the discovery, maybe a deepening of the discovery, or, you know, a greater opening came as a result of allowing myself to be broken open, if I may paraphrase Rumi.
Oh yeah.
So,
Yes, yes, you may paraphrase. Please
so
continue.
yeah, so it was literally like a breaking open, you know, of my heart. And I feel like that was an essential part of me feeling much more in alignment just from the feedback of my expression and activity. And that's how I validate whether, you know, I'm actually speaking with my own voice or not. That's how I validate that personally. If it feels true, however however difficult it might be to describe what feeling true feels like, there is nothing that makes me regret what I express, whether it's in verbal, written, artistic form, or nothing that there's no strong resistance that is telling me, oh, just, you know, the turning inside. And there's also no burning urge for me to continuously listen back to what I said to judge it over and over again. Was it good enough? Was it good enough? Was that good enough? All of that just disappears, you know. I feel good in the process. It feels true. And just release it like a bird.
There you go with the gestures again of just really breaking free. Yes, and that idea of breaking free is what I feel like what you're all about, right? It the whole idea about enabling people to relate and communicate means that to really be authentic with each other, it does require a word you used a second ago was this deeper inquiry, deeper self-inquiry. And you got to have either courage, some guidance through reading or videos, or a coach like you. We're coming to more of a close here, so I want to make sure and move to I think we get a beautiful sense of how you coach and where that comes from inside of you, the knowing, the inner knowing of what it takes to keep on going. And that whole idea of brokenness is not brokenness, it's the beginning of something new, is what you're saying. Oh, I hate to leave today. It feels like there's so much more wisdom, Calvin. So what are you doing currently? How do you reach people? What are you up to now? I know, well, people who are listening could hear the resonance, the beautiful depth in your voice, and you're a podcast host, and so that is obviously one of your elements here. But anything else, please just
Oh, thank you.
bless us with your with you.
Oh, that's very kind of you.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I do a lot of what I call holistic storytelling coaching. I also do strategic storytelling stuff because the storytelling part of the work that I do is, you know, all about, as you mentioned already, you know, helping us to relate and communicate better with each other through self-discovery and expression. And on the holistic strand, it's all about discovering new perspectives. It's not about being wedded to the story that we create, actually. It's more about using the story as a way to create new openings. And from a strategic side, is helping organizations to use stories to connect people inside and their teams, or also to connect with their customer base authentically. And it's about getting people to tell their own stories in their work. So that's how I've spent many years of my consulting and coaching time, and imbuing all of that with mindfulness, bathing it in the tub of mindfulness.
You have such a wonderful way with words, bathing of all things, you know, bringing in words that have a whole different meaning and a context for us, and then putting them with another word that has a different meaning. So bathing mindfulness. Oh, well, there's more. We've got to look you up and find you. Where do we do that?
Oh, thank you. Well, as you rightfully pointed out, calvinniles.com is probably the best way. Everything that I have written and talk about is on there. All of my work is freely available on calvinniles.com, including the links to all of my social channels. So I was delighted to see you there.
Oh, you're going to see me there, Calvin.
I hope so. I hope to see you again too.
Yeah, we will. This is only the beginning of lots of conversations. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for being with us today for this episode of Find Your Voice, Change Your Life. Each person during interviews shares what has helped them find their voice. You can learn from these guests and find your voice so you can be confident to speak up and speak out. And remember to download Doreen's free 7-step guide to fearless speaking at doreen7steps.com. We hope you enjoyed the show and will return next time. Until then, goodbye for now.